The stars have always been patient teachers. They burn for billions of years, asking nothing, offering everything. Light, warmth, the raw materials of life itself. They watch civilizations rise from the mud of young worlds, reach toward the void with trembling hands, and eventually fade back into the silence from which they came. The stars do not mourn, they do not celebrate, they simply endure, ancient beyond comprehension, indifferent to the brief dramas that unfold beneath their gaze.
I have watched stars die. I have seen them collapse into darkness so complete that even light cannot escape their gravity. I have witnessed the birth of new suns from the ashes of the old, nurseries of fire spinning new worlds into existence. In my 1,200 years of life, I believed I understood the universe's rhythms, the rise and fall of species, the eternal cycle of creation and destruction.
I was wrong. My name is Kethos Valindrath, and I am the last High Chronicler of the Vailthuri Ascendancy. For 9,000 years, my people shaped the laws of known space. We were the first to breach the dimensional barriers, the first to harness the energy of dying stars, the first to achieve what lesser species called immortality. Our fleets numbered in the millions, our worlds stretched across 17 galactic arms. We had forgotten what it meant to fear. Now I sit in a borrowed room on a human station, watching their small ships drift past the viewport, and I understand fear intimately. It has become my constant companion, along with exhaustion so deep it has settled into my bones like a disease. I have not slept properly in 43 cycles. Every time I close my eyes, I see them, the hollow, the darkness between stars given purpose and hunger. But I am not writing this account to speak of the hollow. Not yet. History deserves proper context, and what I witnessed deserves more than the desperate scribblings of a broken old scholar. I am writing this because the universe needs to understand what happened, what we did, what we ignored, and what humanity became because of it. The humans have given me this room with its soft lighting and its strange, comfortable furniture. They have given me food that tastes of nothing I recognize, but nourishes adequately. They have given me privacy, which I suspect they know I need more than sustenance. A young human woman checks on me every few hours, not intrusively, just a gentle knock, a quiet question, an offer of assistance. Her name is Commander Sarah Chen, and she has kind eyes that see far more than she reveals. I find myself unsettled by her kindness. We did not deserve it. We do not deserve any of this. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me begin where all stories should begin, at the moment when everything changed. 17 standard cycles ago, the Vailthuri Ascendancy received a transmission from the Outer Territories. A mining colony on the edge of chartered space had gone silent. This was not unusual. Colonies fail for countless reasons, and the Outer Territories have always been dangerous. We sent a survey fleet to investigate. The survey fleet never reported back. We sent a battle group, 47 warships, each capable of leveling a continent. They translated into the system, broadcast a standard arrival signal, and then nothing. No distress calls, no combat telemetry, no debris fields, just silence, as if they had never existed at all. The High Council convened an emergency session.
I was there, as I had been for every significant moment of our civilization's recent history. I remember the arguments, the theories, the dismissive confidence of our military commanders. A spatial anomaly, they said, a navigational error, perhaps a new form of stellar radiation that disrupted our communications.
No one wanted to say the word that hung unspoken in the air: invasion. We had not faced a true military threat in over 3,000 years. The last species to challenge our dominance had been the Korhathi, and we had burned their homeworld to glass in a war that lasted less than a decade. Since then, the galaxy had learned to respect Valthuri supremacy. We were the apex predator of known space, and we had grown comfortable in our certainty. The second battle group was larger. 200 ships, including 3 of our prized Worldbreaker-class dreadnoughts. They translated into the system, broadcasting on all frequencies, weapons charged, shields at maximum power.
This time, we received a transmission.
It lasted only seconds. Visual feeds showed ships being torn apart by weapons we could not identify, not destroyed so much as unraveled, their molecular bonds simply ceasing to exist. We saw crews screaming in vacuum, their bodies dissolving into nothing. We saw the Worldbreakers, the pride of our fleet, crumpling like paper sculptures before something vast and dark that our sensors could not properly resolve. And then the transmission ended, replaced by a sound that still echoes in my nightmares, a frequency that should have been impossible, a vibration that seemed to bypass our ears and speak directly to something primal in our minds. It was not language exactly. It was closer to pure intent, distilled and weaponized. The message was simple: hunger. This was our first contact with the Hollow. In the cycles that followed, we learned fragments of their nature: never enough, never fast enough. They were not a species in any conventional sense. They were something older, something that had slept in the void between galaxies for eons uncounted. Our expansion into dark space, our exploitation of exotic matter sources, our dimensional experiments, we had done something to wake them. And now they were hungry. The war, if such a one-sided slaughter could be called a war, began in earnest. World after world fell silent, fleets vanished, populations measured in billions simply ceased to exist, consumed by darkness that moved through space like a living thing. We threw everything we had at them, our most advanced weapons, our most brilliant tacticians, our most desperate measures. Nothing worked. Within 6 cycles, we had lost 30% of our territory. Within 8, half. Our great civilization, 9,000 years of accumulated knowledge and power, was being erased from existence with a casual efficiency that defied comprehension. The Hollow did not negotiate, they did not demand, they simply consumed and moved on and consumed again. It was during the 9th cycle that I remembered the humans. We had encountered them centuries earlier, during their first tentative steps beyond their home system. They were primitives then, barely capable of faster-than-light travel, their technology laughable by our standards. We had observed them, catalogued them, and dismissed them as inconsequential, another young species reaching for stars they were not ready to touch. But there had been something about them that lingered in my memory, something in the way they moved through crisis, the way they looked at impossible odds, not with despair, but with a quiet, unsettling calculation. I had watched recordings of their history, their wars, their famines, their endless parade of self-inflicted catastrophes. Any other species would have destroyed themselves a dozen times over. The humans had survived. Again and again, against all logic, they had survived. I brought this observation to the High Council, suggesting we reach out to them for assistance, or at least information. Their space was far from the Hollow's current advance. Perhaps they had seen something we had missed. Perhaps their primitive perspective might offer insights our sophistication had overlooked. The council laughed. High Admiral Serenthos, may his spirit find the peace he denied others, spoke for most of them. You suggest we beg for help from creatures who were building mud huts when we were engineering stars? The humans are barely sentient, Chronicler. They fight among themselves over patches of dirt and imaginary lines on maps. What could they possibly offer us? They survive, I said. They should not, by any metric, but they do. Survival is not victory, Serenthos replied. Survival is what the prey does while waiting to be eaten. We are not prey, Chronicler. We are the Veilthuri. The discussion was closed. I was quietly reassigned to archival duties, my concerns noted and filed, and forgotten. The council had more pressing matters. The war was going poorly, and they needed someone to blame besides themselves. 3 cycles later, when our losses had passed 70% and the Hollow had begun moving toward our core worlds, the humans sent us a message. It was simple, unencrypted, broadcast on frequencies we had long since abandoned as primitive. It read, "We have been monitoring your situation. We believe we can help. But you must understand the cost. Please respond if you wish to discuss terms." The council debated for hours. Many wanted to ignore the message entirely. Accepting help from humans would be an admission of weakness, a stain on our legacy that no future victory could erase. Others argued that legacy meant nothing if there was no one left to remember it. In the end, desperation won. A delegation was assembled, and I, perhaps as punishment, perhaps as an afterthought, was included among them. We would travel to human space, hear their terms, and report back to the council. I expected to find primitives living in squalor, their offer of help a naive fantasy born of ignorance. I expected to confirm every assumption our civilization had ever made about younger species and their delusions of relevance. I was not prepared for what I actually found. The human station where we docked was called Aegis Prime. It hung in orbit around a barren moon, unremarkable in every visible way. The architecture was functional rather than beautiful. Gray corridors, efficient lighting, signage in their angular script. There was none of the grandeur we Veilthuri had built into every structure, no demonstration of power through aesthetics. Our delegation numbered 7. I was the most junior member, included primarily to document events for historical archives. High Diplomat Cathara Salonis led our group, her bearing rigid with barely concealed disdain. She had argued against this mission until the very end, and her presence was less cooperation than supervision. We were met at the docking bay by a small human contingent, perhaps a dozen individuals in matching gray uniforms, their faces carefully neutral. Their leader stepped forward, a tall male with graying hair and eyes the color of the stones humans called amber. He introduced himself as Admiral Marcus Webb. "Welcome to Aegis Prime," he said, his voice calm and measured. "I hope your journey was comfortable." Cathara's response was barely civil. "We are not here for comfort, human. We are here because your species inserted itself into matters beyond its comprehension. You claimed to have information about the Hollow. Provide it." Admiral Webb did not react to her tone. If anything, his expression softened slightly, as if he had expected this and found it more sad than offensive. We have more than information, High Diplomat. We have experience. But before we discuss the hollow, perhaps you should rest. You've traveled a great distance, and these conversations are better conducted without exhaustion clouding judgment.
We do not require rest. We require...
With respect, Webb interrupted, his voice still gentle, you need rest more than you know. I've reviewed your transit logs. Your flagship made the journey in 18 days. That's faster than should be possible with your current drive configurations, which means you pushed your systems past safety limits to get here. Your crew is exhausted. Your delegation is exhausted. And exhausted minds make poor decisions.
Kithara stiffened. You presume to lecture us on the capabilities of our own vessels?
I presume nothing. I observe. Webb gestured to the corridor behind him. Quarters have been prepared for your delegation, clean water, food suitable for Valthuri biology, and beds that have been adjusted to your species' preferred sleeping conditions. The briefing will begin in 12 hours. That gives everyone time to rest and approach this with clear heads. There was something in his tone that prevented further argument. Not threat, exactly, but a quiet certainty that he would not be moved. Kithara exchanged glances with the other diplomats, and I saw her swallow words that wanted to escape. Very well, she said finally. 12 hours. We were escorted to our quarters by junior officers who answered practical questions and deflected anything more substantive. I found myself walking beside a young woman with dark hair pulled back in a severe arrangement. Her name tag read Lieutenant Commander Maya Torres, and she moved with the economical grace of someone trained for combat. Your station is smaller than I expected, I said, attempting to gather information through conversation. Torres glanced at me with an expression I could not read. Aegis Prime is a diplomatic facility. It's not meant to impress. Your species does not believe in displaying power through architecture. We believe in efficiency. Impressive buildings don't win wars. She paused at a door and gestured for me to enter. Your quarters, Chronicler. If you need anything, there's a panel by the bed that connects to the support staff. Rest well. She was gone before I could ask more questions, and I was left alone in a room that was comfortable without being luxurious. The bed was indeed adjusted for Valthuri physiology, properly angled, the temperature precisely calibrated. The attention to detail was unexpected. I did not sleep. Instead, I stood at the viewport and watched human ships move through the darkness. They were small by our standards, frigates and cruisers, nothing to rival our dreadnoughts. But they moved in patterns I found myself studying, coordinated in ways that suggested communication faster than conventional systems should allow. Something about this place made me uneasy, and it took hours for me to identify why. It was the quiet, not silence. There was the hum of life support, the distant vibration of engines, the soft sounds of a station at rest. But there was no fear. In the heart of a Valthuri installation facing extinction, there would have been panic barely contained, anger seeking outlet, despair pooling in every corner. Here, there was only calm, watchful, patient calm. The briefing room was larger than I expected, dominated by a holographic display table that currently showed a three-dimensional map of known space. Our delegation sat on one side. The humans arranged themselves opposite, with Admiral Webb at the center. Commander Chen, the woman who would later become my unofficial guardian, sat to his left, her datapad ready. Kithara wasted no time. You claimed to have experience with the hollow. Explain.
Webb nodded slowly. 8 years ago, by our calendar, We detected unusual activity at the edge of our explored space, unusual energy signatures, ships that appeared and vanished without explanation. We sent a research vessel to investigate.
"Let me guess," Kithara said. "It was destroyed. It was consumed." The crew of 347 were absorbed in approximately 14 seconds. We recovered fragments of their transmission, enough to understand what we were dealing with. Webb touched a control, and the holographic display shifted to show sensor recordings. This was our first look at the Hollow. The images were grainy, distorted by interference, but unmistakable. Darkness that moved with purpose, tendrils of void reaching for a ship that seemed to shrink before them.
We lost 4 more vessels over the next several months as we studied them, Webb continued. Unmanned probes mostly, but also one manned scout that got too close. We learned what we could.
And what did you learn? I asked, surprising myself by speaking out of turn. Webb's eyes found mine. We learned they were ancient, older than our galaxy, possibly older than our universe. We learned they exist partially in dimensions we can barely comprehend, which is why conventional weapons pass through them without effect. We learned they are drawn to certain forms of energy, particularly the exotic matter emissions produced by dimensional manipulation and high-yield antimatter reactions.
Kithara went very still. Our civilization's power was built on both technologies.
We also learned, Webb said, that they had been encountered before, millions of years ago, by a species that left records buried in a dead world we discovered during our expansion. That species called them the Hollow, and they described a galaxy-wide civilization that was erased from existence in less than a century.
"If you knew all this," Kithara said slowly, "why did you not warn the galaxy? Why did you not share this information?"
We tried. Webb's voice remained calm, but there was something beneath it now. Weariness, perhaps, or old frustration. 43 months before your first contact with the Hollow, we sent formal communications to every major species in known space. The Veil 3 Ascendancy, the Corvix Federation, the Silenthi Collective, the Marathi Union. All of you.
Kithara shook her head. Impossible. We received no such communication.
Commander Chen spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but precise. "High Diplomat, I have the transmission logs here. We sent the warning via 17 different communication methods, including physical courier drones. Every single one was acknowledged as received." She touched her datapad, and a secondary display appeared, a Valthuri receipt signature, unmistakably authentic, dated 41 months before our first losses.
Kithara stared at it, and I watched the color drain from her face. This must have been
"Filtered out by your automated systems," Chen said. "Communications from primitive species are typically routed to low-priority archives, aren't they? We suspected this would happen, which is why we sent physical drones as well. They were intercepted at your border and returned unopened."
"We warned you," Webb said, and now I could hear the weight of that statement, the exhaustion, the grief, the quiet anger held in check by iron discipline. We warned everyone, and everyone ignored us.
The silence in the room was absolute.
"The Corvex Federation," Webb continued, "dismissed our warning as human paranoia. They were the second major power to fall, 70 billion dead in less than a year. The Silenthi Collective accused us of attempting to manipulate them through fear. They lasted 8 months longer. The Marathi Union never even responded. They're gone now too."
He let that sink in before speaking again.
You are the last major civilization still fighting. The Hollow have consumed approximately 87% of the galaxy's sentient population. In another few months, your core worlds will fall, and humanity will be the only species left with significant territory and population.
Then you should be preparing your own defenses, Cathara said, and I heard desperation creeping into her voice. Why are you wasting resources on a diplomatic mission?
Because we don't intend to wait for the Hollow to come to us. Webb leaned forward, and for the first time I saw something shift in his expression, a glimpse of something vast and focused behind his calm exterior. We've spent 8 years preparing for this, developing weapons that work against extra-dimensional entities, building ships designed specifically to fight something that exists partially outside our reality, training crews to face something that should drive minds to madness. He paused. We intend to stop the Hollow, completely, permanently, and we're offering you the chance to be part of that. Cathara laughed, a harsh, broken sound. You stop the Hollow? With what? We've thrown everything we have at them. Weapons that can crack planets, technologies perfected over millennia. Nothing works. Nothing even slows them down. And you think your species, with your primitive ships and your limited understanding, can succeed where we've failed? Webb did not react to her scorn. I think we approach problems differently. You developed technologies to manipulate reality, to bend the universe to your will. Impressive achievements. But when you encountered something that didn't bend, you had no answer.
And you do?
We have questions. Different questions, asked by a species that has never had the luxury of assuming we would win. Webb stood and walked to the holographic display. Humanity has spent its entire existence fighting for survival, against our environment, against each other, against extinction events that should have ended us a dozen times over. We are very, very good at not dying. He touched the display, and the map shifted to show human space, a small territory, insignificant compared to the great civilizations of the galaxy. But now it was marked with points of light, thousands of them, in patterns I did not immediately understand. Over the past 8 years, we have built 11,000 warships specifically designed to fight the Hollow. We have established manufacturing facilities in dimensions the Hollow cannot easily access. We have developed weapons that target the specific frequencies at which their extra-dimensional forms interface with our reality. He paused. And we have unified every human world, every colony, every faction under a single purpose. 8 billion humans, all working toward one goal. 11,000 ships, Cathara said slowly. You built 11,000 ships in 8 years? 13,000 as of last month. We accelerated production when we realized the other civilizations would not listen. Webb returned to his seat. We've also been running simulations, war games, training exercises. Our crews have practiced for this moment for nearly a decade. They are ready. I found myself speaking again, unable to contain the question. You knew this was coming. You knew the galaxy would burn. And you just prepared? Webb's eyes met mine, and I saw something there I had not expected. Sorrow. Deep, genuine sorrow. We tried to prevent it, Chronicler. We sent warnings. We offered information. We begged, in our own way, for the galaxy to listen. No one did. He exhaled slowly. So we prepared for the worst, and we hoped we would be ready when the time came.
The time has come, Commander Chen added quietly. Your core worlds will be under attack within 40 days. Without intervention, the Valthuri ascendancy will cease to exist within 60.
Cathara stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor.
This is absurd. You expect us to believe that humanity has somehow developed the capability to fight the Hollow when every other civilization has failed? You expect us to trust our survival to primitives who were throwing rocks at each other when we were building the first galactic archives?
Yes, Webb said simply. That is exactly what we expect.
The silence stretched. Cathara's hands trembled at her sides, with anger, with fear, with the weight of choices that no one should have to make.
"What are your terms?" she asked finally, and her voice was barely a whisper.
Webb nodded to Chen, who activated another display. No tribute, no territory, no demands of submission or acknowledgement of superiority. We ask only 3 things.
Cathara waited.
First, your complete scientific archives. Everything you know about dimensional physics, exotic matter, the fundamental nature of reality. Not for conquest, for understanding. The more we know, the better we can fight.
Second, your cooperation in the coming campaign, your remaining fleets coordinated with ours, your tactical knowledge of the territories where we'll be fighting, your people working alongside our people, not as subordinates, but as allies.
And third, Webb paused, and something in his expression shifted. Third, when this is over, if we survive, we want a seat at the table. Humanity wants to be recognized as equals, not superiors, not conquerors, equals. A voice in whatever civilization emerges from this.
Cathara stared at him. That's all?
That's all. We're not interested in revenge for being ignored. We're not interested in building an empire on the ashes of the old order. We're interested in survival. Ours, yours, everyone's. Webb's voice softened. We've spent too long watching species destroy each other over pride and territory. If we survive the Hollow, we want to help build something better.
I watched Cathara struggle with this. Her entire worldview was crumbling. The certainty of Valthuri supremacy, the dismissal of younger species, the confidence that our way was the only way. I could see her searching for the trap, the hidden agenda, the manipulation that must surely be lurking beneath such simple terms. She found nothing, because there was nothing to find.
I will need to consult with the High Council, she said at last.
Of course, but I would urge speed, High Diplomat. The Hollow don't wait for political deliberation.
The meeting adjourned, and our delegation returned to our quarters to prepare the secure transmission to our homeworld. But I did not accompany them immediately. Instead, I lingered in the corridor, and Commander Chen lingered with me.
You have questions, she said. It was not a question.
Many, but one in particular. I turned to face her. Your admiral spoke of humanity's history of survival. Your wars, your disasters, your near extinctions. I have studied those records. By any rational analysis, your species should have destroyed itself long ago.
Probably, Chen agreed.
Yet here you stand, offering to save a galaxy that dismissed you as irrelevant, offering terms that demand nothing but partnership. I struggled to articulate what I was feeling. Why? Any other species would demand tribute, submission, acknowledgement of their superiority. Why don't you?
Chen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was thoughtful. Do you know why humans developed medicine, Chronicler? Not the how, the why.
I shook my head.
Because we watched each other die, from diseases we couldn't understand, from injuries we couldn't treat, from age that took everyone eventually. We hated it, so we started asking questions. How does the body work? What causes sickness? How can we heal? It wasn't efficient at first.
We made terrible mistakes, but we kept trying, because the alternative was watching people we loved die and doing nothing.
She gestured toward the viewport, toward the stars beyond. That's who we are, Chronicler. We're the species that looks at an impossible problem and asks, how do we fix this? Not because we're certain we can, but because not trying is worse than failing.
And the Hollow are simply another impossible problem?
The Hollow are a threat to everyone, not just us, everyone. And when we tried to warn the galaxy, we were ignored. That hurt. She smiled faintly. But it didn't change what needed to be done. The Hollow still needed to be stopped. So we prepared.
Without guarantee of success.
Without guarantee of anything. That's how we've always operated. We survive first, then we figure out what comes next. She met my eyes. Your people built wonders, Chronicler. Achievements that will be remembered for millions of years. But somewhere along the way, you forgot what it felt like to be small and scared and fighting anyway. Humanity never forgot. We couldn't afford to.
I had no response to that. I returned to my quarters and spent hours staring at the stars, thinking about empires and hubris and the quiet courage of a species we had dismissed as primitive. The Council's response came faster than expected, barely 8 hours after we transmitted our report. They agreed to the human terms, all of them. There was no negotiation, no counteroffer, no attempt to salvage dignity from the wreckage of our assumptions.
We were out of options, and everyone knew it. What followed was the most intensive 40 days of my long life. Human and Veil Thuri crews worked side by side in a desperate race to coordinate forces, share information, and prepare for the coming confrontation. I was assigned to serve as a liaison, translating not just language, but concepts between two species that thought in fundamentally different ways.
I learned more about humanity in those 40 days than in all my previous centuries of study. I learned that they argued, constantly, passionately, sometimes viciously. Every strategy was questioned, every assumption challenged. Decisions that our high command would have handed down as absolute decrees were debated by committees, refined through disagreement, strengthened by opposition. It seemed chaotic, inefficient, frustrating.
But the strategies that emerged from those debates were extraordinary. They had considered angles we never thought to examine, prepared for contingencies we had dismissed as too unlikely to matter. Their approach to the Hollow was not a single overwhelming assault, but a complex web of coordinated actions, feints, traps, cascading attacks designed to exploit every weakness they had identified.
I learned that they trained obsessively. Human crews ran combat simulations for hours every day, drilling scenarios until responses became instinct. They practiced failures, what to do when primary systems failed, when communications were lost, when entire fleet elements were destroyed. They expected things to go wrong, and they prepared accordingly. I learned that they cared for each other with an intensity that seemed almost wasteful to my Velthuri sensibilities. When a human crew member was injured in an accident during training, hundreds of colleagues donated blood and stayed by their bedside, despite having no practical reason to do so. When I asked about this, Commander Chen simply said, "They're family. You don't abandon family." I learned that they were afraid. Unlike the carefully maintained composure of Valthuri military officers, humans spoke openly about their fears, the Hollow, death, failure, letting down their comrades. They shared these fears, acknowledged them, even laughed about them in dark humor that I initially found disturbing. But somehow, speaking the fear aloud seemed to diminish it,
transform it into something that could be carried. And I learned that beneath all the chaos and emotion and apparent weakness, there was a core of something I could only call resolve. Not the cold certainty of Valthuri discipline, but something warmer, more flexible, more enduring. When the situation demanded it, humans could become terrifyingly focused. I watched crews work 30-hour shifts without complaint. I watched engineers solve problems in minutes that our technicians said were impossible. I watched Admiral Webb make decisions with a calm that suggested he had faced his own death many times before and made peace with it. By the time our combined fleet moved out to meet the Holo, I had begun to understand why humanity had survived when so many others had fallen. They were not the strongest, not the smartest, not the most advanced, but they were adaptable in ways that other species were not. They bent when we would have broken. They improvised when we would have followed doctrine to destruction. They worked together with a coordination that transcended hierarchy, driven by shared purpose rather than commanded authority. And they never, ever gave up. The combined fleet assembled at a point in space our navigators designated Grid Reference 7719 Alpha. It was chosen for its proximity to the Holo's projected advance and its distance from any significant population centers. If we failed here, there would be time for evacuations. Not much time, but some. I was stationed aboard the human flagship, Unconquered Spirit. It was not the largest vessel in the fleet. Several Valthuri dreadnoughts outmassed it significantly, but it served as the command center for the entire operation. Admiral Webb had insisted that human and Valthuri command staff work from the same location, citing the need for unified decision-making. The bridge was crowded with officers from both species, tensioned thick in the recycled air. Holographic displays showed our forces arrayed in formations I did not fully understand, clusters and wings, and reserve elements positioned according to human tactical doctrine. Our Valthuri commanders had argued against some of these arrangements, but Webb had been quietly inflexible. "Trust us," he had said. "This is what we prepared for." Now, as we waited for the Holo to arrive, I found myself standing near Commander Chen at a secondary monitoring station. She was studying readouts with an intensity that suggested she was memorizing every data point. "You should be at a safer posting," I said. "Observation, perhaps. This vessel will be primary target." "There is no safe posting in this battle, Chronicler." She glanced at me with a faint smile. "Besides, this is where I'm needed." "You're not afraid?" "Terrified. But fear doesn't change what needs to be done." She returned her attention to the displays. "Are you afraid?" I considered the question honestly. I have been afraid for so long that I am not certain I remember any other state. But this fear is different. Different how?
When I came here, I was afraid of dying. Now I struggle to articulate it. Now I am afraid of failing, of not being worthy of the trust you have placed in us."
Chen's expression softened. "You're worthy, Chronicler. Your people made mistakes. Everyone does. What matters is what you do next." Before I could respond, a sensor officer called out, "Contact! Multiple signatures translating in at the edge of sensor range. Hollow signatures. Hundreds of them. No, thousands." The bridge went silent. On the main display, points of darkness bloomed like spreading bruises against the star field. The Holo did not travel in ships exactly. They were the ships, or perhaps the ships were extensions of them. Each signature represented something vast and hungry and utterly alien. Admiral Webb stood from his command chair, his face illuminated by the pale light of the holographic displays. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the bridge.
This is it. Everything we've worked for, everything we've sacrificed, comes down to this moment. He paused, letting the words settle. I'm not going to give you a speech about glory or destiny or the righteousness of our cause. You already know why we're here. We're here because no one else can do this, because we prepared when others dismissed, because we survived when others fell. He turned to face the main display, where the Hollow's advance was now clearly visible, a tide of darkness rolling toward our fleet.
Humanity has always been underestimated, too primitive, too divided, too chaotic to matter. But we're still here. We've always been here, doing what needed to be done when everyone else said it was impossible. His voice hardened. Today, we prove them wrong. Today, we save this galaxy, not because it deserves saving, but because that's who we are. That's what we do.
He sat back down and touched the fleet-wide comm. All ships, this is Admiral Webb. Execute Operation Lighthouse. May whatever gods you believe in watch over us all.
The battle began.
I have witnessed many conflicts in my long life, but nothing prepared me for what followed. The Hollow advanced in their characteristic silence, that terrible hunger frequency beginning to vibrate through our hull. I saw Vailthuri officers clutch their heads, fighting against the psychic pressure that had broken so many minds before.
But the human crews did not flinch. They had prepared for this. 8 years of exposure training, neural conditioning, psychological fortification. The hunger touched them, but it did not break them.
Phase 1 weapons, fire, Webb ordered.
From our fleet, beams of light lanced out, not ordinary energy weapons, but something new. They struck the leading edge of the Hollow formation, and I watched in disbelief as the darkness recoiled. For the first time in my memory, the Hollow hesitated.
Dimensional resonance weapons, Chen explained quietly. They target the frequencies at which the Hollow interface with our reality, force them to either fully manifest or fully retreat.
Impossible, I breathed. We tried dimensional weapons. They did not work.
You tried to push them into other dimensions. We're forcing them into this one. Chen's eyes never left the display. It's the difference between trying to hide from a predator and making the predator fight on your terms. The Hollow adapted quickly. They always did. But the initial shock gave our fleet an opening, and the human ships exploited it with ruthless precision. Squadrons broke formation and reformed, drawing portions of the Hollow swarm into carefully prepared kill zones. Weapons fired in coordinated volleys, each shot timed to build on the effects of the one before.
It was not the overwhelming force the Vailthuri favored. It was something more subtle, a dance of positioning and timing, each movement calculated, each response prepared. When the Hollow tried to flank our formation, reserve elements were already in position to intercept. When they concentrated their assault on weak points, those points were revealed to be traps, with hidden weapons platforms activating at precisely the right moment. For the first time, the Hollow were fighting something that had studied them, that had prepared for them, that was not reacting to their attacks, but anticipating them. The battle raged for hours. We took losses, terrible losses. Ships crumpled and crews consumed, Vailthuri and human alike vanishing into the hungry darkness. But for every ship we lost, the Hollow lost more. Their forms, forced into full manifestation by our weapons, proved vulnerable in ways they had never been before. They could be hurt. They could be killed. They could be stopped.
Fleet status? Webb asked during a brief lull in the fighting.
63% combat effective, the tactical officer reported. Heavy losses in the forward elements, but reserve forces are rotating in as planned.
Hollow forces have been reduced by approximately 47%. Webb nodded slowly. And their core? Their command structure?
Still approaching. It's been directing the swarm from the rear, but our advance is forcing it forward. Estimated contact in 37 minutes.
The Hollow had a core, a central entity that controlled and coordinated the swarm. Human researchers had identified it early in their studies, though no one knew exactly what it was. Destroying the swarm would mean nothing if the core survived. It would simply retreat, regenerate, and return.
Phase 3, Webb said. All elements prepare for Phase 3.
The fleet began to shift, formations opening in patterns that seemed to invite attack. The Hollow, sensing weakness, pressed forward eagerly. They pushed through gaps in our lines, surrounding smaller fleet elements, pressing toward the flagships at the center of our formation.
It was a trap. The most elaborate trap ever constructed. As the Hollow committed their remaining forces to what they believed was a killing blow, hidden elements activated throughout the battlefield. Stealth platforms that had been positioned days in advance, weapons satellites that had been powered down to avoid detection, entire squadrons that had been waiting in the void for exactly this moment.
The Hollow found themselves surrounded not by prey, but by a cage of fire.
And in the center of that cage, advancing with inexorable purpose, was the human core fleet. The ships they had held in reserve, their most powerful vessels, now moving to engage the Hollow's central entity directly.
The core of the Hollow was vast, a darkness that seemed to drink the light of stars, a presence that made my mind ache just to observe. It had consumed civilizations. It had ended species beyond counting. It was ancient when the first Veilthuri ancestor crawled from primordial mud.
The human ships engaged it without hesitation.
What followed defied description. Weapons of types I had never seen, employing principles I did not understand, tore into the core's manifested form. Human vessels pressed the attack even as they were destroyed, their crews fighting until the last moment, buying time for their comrades to continue the assault. It was suicidal. It was heroic. It was both at once, distinguished only by the outcome.
And slowly, impossibly, the core began to die.
I watched it thrash in ways that seemed to distort space itself. I watched it scream on frequencies that broke minds across the battlefield. I watched it fight with desperate fury as its eternal existence faced something it had never encountered, an opponent that could not be consumed, could not be broken, would not stop. Admiral Webb stood at the center of the bridge, his face lit by the fire of a dying god, and gave the final order.
All ships, everything you have, now.
The combined fleet, what remained of it, opened fire. Human and Veilthuri weapons blazing in concert, energy of every type converging on the wounded core. It was the accumulated rage and grief and defiance of every species the Hollow had ever threatened, channeled through weapons forged by a people too stubborn to surrender.
The core shattered.
It did not explode, nothing so clean as that. It came apart, its darkness fragmenting, its cohesion failing. The pieces that remained dissolved, unable to maintain existence without the central will to bind them. Across the battlefield, the swarm entities began to falter, their coordination broken, their purpose lost. In the span of minutes, the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known ceased to exist.
The bridge was silent. Then, slowly, a sound began to build. Human voices raised in something between a cheer and a sob, a release of tension held for 8 years.
Valthuri officers stood in stunned disbelief, watching their impossible victory unfold on displays they had expected to show their annihilation.
I wept. For the first time in centuries, I wept, and I was not ashamed.
Admiral Webb sat heavily in his command chair, and I saw the exhaustion finally catching up to him. The calm he had maintained throughout the battle cracked, and beneath it was the face of a man who had carried an impossible burden for too long.
Commander Chen approached him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "We did it, sir."
"We did," he agreed quietly. "God help us, we actually did."
I made my way across the bridge, drawn by something I could not name. When I reached Webb, I did something no Valthuri had done in the presence of a human in all of recorded history. I bowed.
Not a shallow courtesy, but a full bow of respect, the kind we reserved for the heroes of our legends, the founders of our civilization, the beings we considered greater than ourselves.
"On behalf of the Valthuri Ascendancy," I said, my voice rough with emotion, "I offer our profound gratitude. You have saved not just my people, but every people who will ever exist. We owe you a debt that can never be repaid."
Webb looked at me with tired eyes, and something like a smile crossed his weathered face. "We didn't do this for debt or gratitude, Chronicler. We did it because it needed to be done, because you were dying and we could help."
After we ignored you, after we dismissed you, after we...
"After you made mistakes," Webb shook his head slowly. "Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what happens next. Your people, all the people of this galaxy, have a second chance now, a chance to build something better than what came before."
He reached out and clasped my arm in the human gesture of fellowship. "Will you take it?" I thought about everything I had witnessed, the courage, the sacrifice, the refusal to surrender even when surrender seemed the only option, the willingness to save those who had treated humanity with contempt, not for reward or revenge, but simply because it was the right thing to do.
"Yes," I said, "we will." That was 17 cycles ago. I have spent the time since serving as the primary liaison between the Valthuri Reconstruction Council and the Human Alliance. We are rebuilding, slowly, painfully, but with purpose. The scars of the Hollow War will take generations to heal, but we are healing.
The galaxy is different now. The old hierarchies, the assumed superiorities, the casual dismissals of lesser species, all of it has been swept away, replaced by something more humble and more honest. Humanity has their seat at the table, just as they requested, no more, no less. They do not demand tribute or acknowledgement. They work alongside us as partners, sharing their knowledge, learning from ours, building something new together.
I am often asked to lecture on the war, to provide the Valthuri perspective for those too young to remember. I tell them the facts, the battles, the losses, the eventual victory, but I always end with the same lesson, the one that I believe future generations must never forget.
We were warned. Humanity sent their message, offered their help, begged the galaxy to listen. We ignored them because we could not imagine that a primitive species might see what we had missed. Our pride, our certainty, our 9,000 years of accumulated superiority convinced us that nothing could threaten our dominion, and that those who claimed otherwise were simply too small to understand.
We were wrong. We were catastrophically,
unforgivably wrong, and the price of that arrogance was measured in billions of lives, entire civilizations erased, an ancient galaxy brought to the edge of extinction.
But humanity did not abandon us to the consequences of our mistakes. They could have. They had every right to. They could have waited behind their defenses, watched the galaxy burn, and emerged as the sole inheritors of the ashes. Instead, they came. They fought. They died alongside us, for us, because that is who they are.
That is the lesson I want remembered. Not just the hollow, not just the war, but the nature of the species that saved us. They are not the strongest. They are not the most advanced. They do not claim superiority or demand submission. They are simply, stubbornly, impossibly determined to survive and to bring others with them when they do.
They ignored Earth's warning. Nothing survived. Nothing except humanity. Nothing except those humanity chose to save. And in the end, that made all the difference.
I sit now in my quarters on a rebuilt Valthuri station, watching the stars through my viewport. They are the same stars that have watched civilizations rise and fall for billions of years. Patient teachers, indifferent witnesses. But they feel different now. Less cold, less empty. Because somewhere among them, human ships are flying. Human colonies are growing. Human children are being born into a galaxy that almost didn't exist, saved by the stubborn courage of a species that refused to accept the inevitable. There is a human word for what I feel when I think about them. The humans taught it to me, and I have come to treasure it. The word is hope. And for the first time in longer than I can remember, I believe in it. This is the testimony of Kathos Valindrath, last High Chronicler of the old Valthuri Ascendancy, first Ambassador of the New. I record these words so that those who come after will understand what happened when the galaxy ignored Earth's warning. Nothing survived. Nothing at all.
Except what humanity fought to save.
And that, in the end, was everything that mattered.